Putin is escalating Russia's war against Ukraine while telling Donald Trump the opposite. Ukraine is getting ready for the next round of negotiations on the peace plan. New details. Putin's war against Ukraine is deepening economic problems inside Russia. The Kremlin does not spare Russians for the war. December has become a record month since full-scale invasion started in 2022. Russia has lost more than 33,000 soldiers just during 1 month, said Madyar, commander of the Unmanned Systems Forces of Ukraine. In November, for example, Russia has lost 26,000 people on the battlefield. According to Madyar, fighting on the front now, in January, is not as intense as usual. The Russians are accumulating strength for further attacks, so Putin has no intention to stop the war. Despite Zelensky and Trump's talk of an ongoing peace process, Putin seems only too happy to continue waging war in Ukraine. Independent writes, Russia wants to eliminate Ukraine as a free and independent state. Meanwhile, Ukraine wants to survive. Independent states, each time the worst-case scenario was avoided, only thanks to emergency diplomatic efforts by European leaders. The fighting in Ukraine continues, not because of the absence of losses or pressure, but because of the reluctance of key players, both supporters of Ukraine and allies of Russia, to decisively change the balance of power. China, Iran, and North Korea deliberately support Moscow to the extent that the war exhausts the West, but does not escalate into a global conflict.
The repeated promises that peace is near are based on little more than blind optimism and a desperate need to pander to Donald Trump's fantasies. Russia will continue to try to secure through diplomatic means what it has failed to conquer in 11 years of war, and its key tool for doing so will continue to be Donald Trump. 3 times during 2025, Trump blindsided Europe's leaders by attempting to coerce Ukraine into accepting Russia's demands under the guise of a ceasefire agreement, independent editorial.
Trump says he doesn't believe Ukraine struck Putin residents in Novgorod region in the end of December. Aboard Air Force One en route back to Washington, he told reporters that something happened nearby, but it was not about Russian dictators' building. Moscow accused Kyiv of trying to strike a residence with almost 100 long-range attack drones, but the U.S. National Security Agency concluded that Ukraine did not attempt to do this.
I don't believe that strike happened. There is something that happened fairly nearby, but had nothing to do with this.
Why did you believe Putin in that moment and then go say that about Ukraine?
Because nobody knew at that moment. I mean, that was the first I heard about it.
So why not?
He said that his house was attacked. We don't believe that happened, now that we've been able to check.
President Zelensky emphasized that Ukraine remains committed to diplomatic efforts. However, if allies' support is insufficient, Ukraine will have to use Plan B.
Our country has 2 paths. The first one, the less painful, is peaceful diplomatic one. It's my #1 choice. We want to end the war. I understand we're very close to achieving it, but at some point, if Russia blocks all of this, if our partners don't force Russia to stop the war, there will be another path, defense. And at that point, fresh forces will be needed. That's why I'm pursuing a parallel reboot of all structures, just in case.
Ukraine is getting ready for the next round of negotiations on the peace plan. Meeting of Coalition of Willing is planned on 6th of January. Zelensky added, stability and predictability of military aid for Kyiv is what could really turn Moscow to diplomacy. And Kyiv is actively working on documents with Europe and the United States to ensure stable defense support.
A new chance to end the war. This is how Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky described the launched negotiation track between Kyiv and partners in the Coalition of the Willing. On the 3rd of January in the capital of Ukraine, 15 advisors to the leaders of coalition countries gathered, as well as representatives of the European Union and NATO. Special representative of the U.S. President for Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, participated online. Consultations with advisors were divided into 3 negotiation panels. The first was dedicated to uniting efforts in the diplomatic sphere. In particular, representatives familiarized themselves with the draft peace plan of 20 points, which Volodymyr Zelensky had previously made public.
This was a session where the closest advisors to their leaders on national security issues evaluated the work done, expressed their common positions. We have a very dynamic schedule, because already on Tuesday in Paris, the leaders of the countries participating in the coalition of the willing must gather. Therefore, the volume of information they received must be transmitted to their governments.
The second panel concerned the economic component of the peace plan. Kyiv, together with Washington and the leadership of the World Bank, is developing a document in which all financial needs of Ukraine for post-war reconstruction and prosperity over the next decade will be calculated, stated Ukrainian Economy Minister Oleksiy Sobolev.
Regarding funds, the estimated amount of 800 billion is for 10 years, to double Ukraine's GDP and rebuild, according to World Bank reports. And now this amount exists, that is, for 10 years. And now we are looking for sources of income for these 10 years. I also want to add that in our conversations with the United States and Europeans, there are no contradictions that European integration is the main basis for economic prosperity.
On the third panel, the possibility of holding an all-Ukrainian referendum to confirm the peace plan was discussed. In addition, the 20 points include a provision for holding elections after signing the agreement. Everything depends on when the ceasefire agreement is concluded and how strong the security guarantees will be.
This is a preliminary conversation, but it is very important that partners are no longer just writing their fantasies on paper. They are trying to probe the practical side of this peace process and understand, calculate all risks. We tried to explain to them that for us, Ukrainians, the first question is security guarantees.
Separate work is being conducted with advisors on national defense from partner countries of Ukraine. On the 3rd of January in Kyiv, representatives of the power bloc of states in the coalition of the willing gathered. The desire to establish a strong and effective peace coincides for Kyiv and partners, Volodymyr Zelensky summarized. On the 6th of January, national defense advisors will gather in Paris. However, the next big step in the negotiation process will be the meeting of leaders of the coalition of the willing countries in the French capital. All diplomatic efforts are now directed toward it, stated the president of Ukraine.
Leaders will discuss many different issues, but the focus is on security guarantees and reconstruction. Also in Paris, there will be meetings with President Trump's team. They will last a day, possibly two. And after that, I think, we will prepare for a meeting in the USA at the level of leaders in a wide circle. We would like all this to happen before the end of January.
Volodymyr Zelensky discussed joint actions with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer at the upcoming meeting of leaders of the coalition of the willing in Paris, coordinated further diplomatic steps. The president of Ukraine wrote on social network X. Czech Prime Minister Andrej Babiš also confirmed his participation in the gathering in his video address. Reported by Andrei Dmitrenko, UATV News.
U.S. Senator has called on President Trump to take more aggressive action against Russian oil shipments that are helping finance Moscow's war machine. According to MS Now, Chris Coons, a senior Democratic senator, urged Trump to apply the same tactics used to intercept Venezuelan tanker ships to the so-called shadow fleet transporting Russian oil. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle believe such moves could gain bipartisan support and help limit funding for Vladimir Putin's military operations. A tanker linked to Russia's shadow fleet has run aground, highlighting growing operational risks, even for vessels used to bypass sanctions. The crude oil tanker Kendil, sailing under the flag of Oman, ran aground near Bozkada off the coast of Turkey. A similar incident previously involved another Russian shadow fleet tanker, Kairos, which ran aground near Bulgaria after being damaged by unmanned drones in the Black Sea. Russia's shadow fleet is facing growing problems at sea because it is trying to evade sanctions, not to ensure safety. The tankers are often old, poorly maintained. They take risky routes and delay repairs, sometimes drifting at sea without a clear destination. Russia's opposition is beginning to openly campaign against the Kremlin, using growing public anger over economic hardship. This is reported by The Times. As Russia's economy slides toward recession, value-added tax has been raised by 2 percentage points. Utility bills have risen by about 12% over the past year, and civilian sectors remain in crisis. Both left-wing and nationalist opposition groups are now tapping into complaints from ordinary Russians about falling living standards, turning economic frustration into a political challenge for the ruling party. By the way, the opposition debate in Russia begins with wages, which is extremely low. From January 1st, Russia's federal minimum wage is about 27,000 rubles a month, roughly $325 for a full-time job of about 40 hours a week. For comparison, in the United States, the federal minimum wage is about $1,260 a month. Moreover, about 1.8 million working Russians earn wages below the federal minimum wage. This is official data from Russia's statistics agency, available as of 2025. Russia's war against Ukraine ruins country's economy and basic infrastructure. In Russia's Zabaikalsky Krai, around 3,000 residents have been without heating for nearly a week after a major break in a heating pipeline. The accident happened when temperatures dropped to -29 degrees Celsius. A second rupture followed, and repairs have still not been completed. Local media report that dozens of apartment buildings, as well as a school and kindergartens, were left without heat. The situation highlights how Russia's economy, strained by the costs of war and sanctions, is leaving ordinary people exposed, even in extreme winter conditions. That's all for today's News Digest. Stay informed, stay critical, like the video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. See you next time.